had the opportunity to sit down with Dr. Vivek Murthy to talk about mental health specifically when it comes to the workplace. While serving as the 21st Surgeon General, Dr. Murthy is focused on drawing attention to and working across government to address a number of public health concerns. He was raised in Miami, graduated from Harvard, Yale School of Medicine, and Yale School of Management. During our time together, we talk about the newly released framework for mental health in the workplace, which I will also link in the caption. We talk about things like burnout, social isolation, loneliness, and how this overall impacts our mental health. Let's get into it.
I'm really glad we're doing this too. You know, last week had asked my audience online and kind of what is on your mind when it comes to mental health, especially when it comes to work, and I got thousands of responses.
Really?
And a lot of what we're kind of talking about today touches on a lot of areas that I think people are looking for information on, tips on, really just to engage kind of in a dialogue on. So I do really appreciate you taking the time because it's a very important topic.
Of course. No, I'm happy to. This is, to me, mental health and well-being is the most important public health issue that we have to deal with in this moment, not just in the United States, but around the world, because so many people are struggling, and we've got to address this issue now. Especially, I think we have an opportunity as people are coming through the pandemic and are asking themselves, hey, how do they want to rebuild their lives after the pandemic, and how do we want to reimagine everything from work to school to our neighborhoods and communities? This is our chance to, in particular with work, I think, redesign our workplaces.
This is a great opportunity to, if there's a boundary, you're like, I really wanted to put that in place. Now's a great chance to do that. And it's nice when you say globally because my audience is global. And so when I ask these questions, I always try to go through and be like, all right, are there themes? When it comes to mental health across the globe, from what I've seen, we're all experiencing very similar things.
Yeah,
which
that's
is really
right.
Yeah, it's really nice to see how someone living right across the world can be experiencing such similar things to you. Are there themes you're seeing right now when it comes specifically to mental health?
We are seeing rising rates of depression, anxiety, and loneliness and isolation. And this is really deeply concerning. It's happening for people across the age spectrum. So we're seeing young people in particular struggle, but again, this is happening with folks who are working, people who are retired. And sometimes people think, well, is it just because of the pandemic? Because we've come through this incredibly difficult 2 years, which has displaced us, turned our lives upside down. That's part of it. But the truth is, these trends in mental health they preceded the pandemic, and things were getting worse for many years. Just take kids, for example. In the US, there was a 57% increase in the suicide rate in the 10 years prior to COVID-19. We've also seen that rates of hopelessness and sadness among high school students has been going up, where now nearly half of American high school students feel persistently sad or hopeless. And so there's a real trend here that's concerning, but this is, I think, our opportunity to address that, because we actually know how in many respects. We know how to increase access to care, we know how to invest in prevention, we know how to really change the culture around mental health, but it's going to take all of us working together, policymakers, leaders in education and in business, and everyday citizens around the world, changing how they think and talk about mental health so that people don't feel ashamed to ask for help.
So, we're in this mental health crisis, which sounds like it's been here for a lot longer than we kind of realize, because I think, a lot of people think it's associated to the pandemic. And how does work impact that? How does work really impact our mental health or play into this?
Well, work has an undeniable impact on our mental health. Most people who are working full-time spend nearly half of their waking hours at work. And it's the people you interact with, the nature of the work itself, the work culture and environment that shape how you are. And the truth is, most people know this intuitively, right? If you have a bad day at work, it impacts how you show up for your partner, or for your kids, or for your friends. And similarly, if you have a really good day at work, sometimes it can really improve your mood, and you show up in a really positive way for the people around you. So there is that interplay. And there is this old idea that when people go to work, they just check their personal baggage at the door and all experiences, and they just show up as a different person.
It's a nice idea.
And then vice versa. Yeah, that really just is not how human beings operate. And so there is this really powerful connection. And what that means is that if we understand that workplaces can be designed to support mental health and well-being, we can turn them into engines for not only well-being for workers, but also engines that can drive even more productivity and creativity and retention in the workplace. So investing in mental health in the workplace is really a win-win for workers and for organizations. And that's why I recently issued this framework on workplace mental health and well-being, because this is our chance to recognize that connection, to recognize that too many workers right now are actually working in toxic workplaces and spaces that actually detract from their mental health. 76% of workers, in fact, are saying that their workplace has had some negative impact on their mental health and well-being. And every worker, regardless of what sector they're in, whether they're working in a factory or cleaning floors in a school or working behind a computer, they all deserve to work in a place that supports their mental health.
Absolutely. And I find sometimes, companies can have the best intention. We really want to make this a good place to work, and how can we change mental health? But oftentimes it's like, what do we do? And that's what's so great reading through the framework. I'm like, these are actually actionable components where you can sit down and be like, all right, now I have some, guiding principles when it comes to addressing this in the workplace. So can you walk through the 5 essential components?
So these 5 essentials are the foundation for mental health in the workplace. And they start with, number 1, protection from harm. Everybody wants to work in a place where they feel physically safe and psychologically safe. Making sure that exists, that it's encoded both in the culture and policies and practices in an institution is absolutely essential. And part of that also is making sure people have adequate time for rest between work so that they can renew, they can restore themselves and show up in their fullest and best capacity at work. The second essential is around connection and community. This is one that's actually often largely underappreciated. But it turns out when you look at the data and studies from this, you find that people are connected to others at work. It actually enhances their productivity and their creativity. It increases the chances that they want to stick around that workplace because they feel like they belong, they feel seen. And so there are steps that workplaces can take to make sure that they are creating spaces and places for people to connect and get to know one another, not just as skill sets, but more broadly as human beings. And leaders need to lead by example in doing this as well. The third area is around work-life harmony. This is challenging for all of us, and no doubt it has been for a long time. But during the pandemic in particular, so many people came to see just how important those responsibilities outside of work are. Everyone being there when your child is sick, for example, and being able to take time off from work to care for them is so important. Being able to care for your elderly relatives, if they're not well, your mom or your dad, if they're sick, that's critical too. And if you are not well, it's important to be able to take time off. So flexibility, autonomy, paid sick leave, these are critical components that enable work-life harmony, but so are boundaries between work and non-work life. And it's tough, even tougher now than it was 30 years ago, because especially because of technology, work seeps into every part of our life, right? Into weekends, evenings, vacation time. And we might think, hey, that's more efficient, isn't it? We can just clear out our inbox when a message pops up. But it turns out never having a mental break from work means that we never have time to renew and restore. So those are sort of 3 critical ones. The last 2 essentials I'll mention, one is around mattering at work. We all want to know that we matter and that our work matters. But too many workers don't feel valued in the workplace. And making sure that people see the connection between their work and the mission, making sure that we build a culture of gratitude and appreciation of work is essential. And finally, opportunities for growth. We all need clear, equitable pathways for advancement. We need feedback that's constructive and actionable. We all want to grow in different ways, and being able to provide those opportunities is critical. So these 5 essentials form the foundation for mental health and well-being in the workplace. And any workplace out there that's wondering, hey, how do I get started on this? You can start by listening to your workers, by bringing them to the table, by sharing this framework with them and asking them, how are we doing as an organization on these 5 fronts?
Absolutely. I love that it's work-life harmony, because oftentimes people think balance, but the reality is there's no, clear balance in work-life harmony. And the way we are working with, these new hybrid models, there's so much integration between work and home life, and maybe part of your home is your working space. And so I love that, wording that's been used there. And the idea on breaks. And oftentimes when we think of taking breaks and rest, we're like, but I'm not at my laptop. But you're thinking about work. That's not having a break. And I remember speaking to a gentleman, and I was kind of explaining this concept of, well, when's the last time you took a break? He's like, well, I didn't work last time. I'm like, but you thought about work. When's the last time you took a break? Mentally. And he's, years ago. And I'm like, and I think that's something that is not, talked about enough, is the mental break of disconnecting from just leaving work as it is and going and living life without thinking about, tomorrow I have to do X, Y, and Z. So I love that you called that out. That's awesome.
And it's really interesting you bring that up, because I think that the remote work shift has actually made this in some ways trickier for people, because your office is now in your house for many people. And for many folks before, when you left the office, that's when you had a bit of a mental break from work. But now that's just not the case, because your work is always around you. So in some ways we have to be even more intentional about what we're doing to create that break between work and a non-work life. I have 2 small kids who are 4 and 6. They force me to take a break, because when I'm doing bedtime or dinner time with them, or when I'm playing with them, I have to be focused. Because if I'm not, they call me out. They say, why are you on your phone? Why are you looking at there? Why aren't you paying attention? But we all need something in our life that pulls us away. It could be a hobby, it could be family, it could be friends, it could be other engagements that we create. But we need that, because to have a psychological break from work, that is when our brain renews. It's when we replenish our energy and our creative stores. And if we're not doing that, then it might seem like we're efficient because we're solving work problems during our downtime. But the truth is that wears on us, and it contributes to exhaustion and burnout.
I think there's this idea around, oh, well, you worked 80 hours this week. That's amazing. You're so effective. And I'm like, I can do that too, but the output I'm producing, it's not going to be as creative.
That's right.
It's not going to be as time efficient. It might take me twice as amount of time it would if I actually took a break. And then, keeping yourself accountable by some means to actually force that break until it becomes habit almost. A common thing that I hear really often is, I think I'm burnt out, or I am burnt out. And burnout's this massive topic, and I think, what is burnout? Like, how could burnout look for someone? What would be the signs and symptoms to kind of look out that point to burnout? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because sometimes burnout and mental health get conflated, as being one and the same. And they're related in some ways, but somewhat distinct. Burnout is a workplace phenomenon, right?
Okay.
It's what we feel, when we're in a workplace that is driving us in a way that doesn't allow us to renew, that isn't connected to meaning, where we feel like we can't deliver what it is that we need to deliver. And it can be characterized by exhaustion, by a feeling of depersonalization, by cynicism. And if you've felt these in the workplace, it's not unusual for people to feel this from moment to moment. But if you're feeling this persistently, and if it's building, that may be a sign that you are in fact burned out. And burnout can be associated with and can increase the risk for anxiety and for depression, over time. So we have to be thoughtful about that connection, but just because someone is experiencing burnout does not necessarily mean that they have mental illness per se. Again, this is a workplace phenomenon. And the result is that the solutions have to be driven by and shaped by the workplace as well. So what we're finding is that if an organization is thinking about how to address burnout on their workers, making sure that, again, that people have breaks so that they can rest and renew, they can take care of the responsibilities outside of work are very important. Making sure that people have a work environment itself that is supportive, where people connect with one another, they feel a sense of belonging, they feel support. That is also essential, because when you don't have that, when you don't have an environment that supports you in the workplace, and when you can't take care of your responsibilities at home, that contributes to stress. And stress in the short term sometimes can be helpful. When I feel stressed before a big exam or presentation, that maybe sharpens my focus. But chronic stress, that wears on us. It increases our risk for mental health concerns, but also increases our risk for physical illness as well over time. And so this is about reducing chronic stress, in a person's life, so that they can actually do their job better. And a lot of the responsibility of that needs to be held by workplace leaders, and they have to bring workers into that conversation. And a lot of times, what I've been really impressed by, Laura, is that a lot of folks in workplaces, they have a lot of insights into what they need. They're just not always sure that the workplace is willing to give it to them, or that if they bring it up, it'll be received positively. But that's one of the reasons we put together this framework, is we wanted to drive forward a conversation, globally, really, about workplace well-being, because this is the time to do it, and it's going to require a strong dialogue between workers and workplace leaders.
It's interesting because there's some dependency on the leadership and the workplace to make these actionable steps to better the workplace for mental health and well-being, but some people are experiencing crazy levels of burnout right now at work, and they don't have that supportive environment, but they have bills and they've got to show up for work. So are there any kind of tips or things you would suggest if you don't have that at work, but you've got to show up anyways, and you're experiencing burnout? What could someone do in that scenario?
Well, here's some things that can help with that stress and burnout that many people are experiencing. One is certainly, even though it can be tough, I think advocating for yourself is important. And being able to articulate what your needs are to your supervisor, to say, look, I need this time off, to take care of my family, to take care of myself. That's important. I know it's not always easy to do, but it's important to just start there. But there are other steps we can take in our own lives to help improve our own mental health and well-being. And one of them actually has to do with sleep. This is a tough one, But if we look at the quality of our sleep, again, sleep is not just about quantity, it's about quality of sleep. And for many of us, our phones interrupt the quality of our sleep, right? We may have alerts that bing during the night. It might be the last thing that we look at. It may eat into our sleep time because we think we're going to check email for 2 minutes, and all of a sudden we're then on watching videos, and we're doing this and that, and streaming this. All of us do this, but having boundaries with technology to help protect sleep is important. The second is physical activity. Physical activity is one of the most powerful things that we have that can lift our mood and reduce our stress. And it doesn't have to be working out for an hour every day, although if you can do that, that will help a lot. It could even be 15 to 20 minutes that you spend in the morning before you go to work. When you come back, doing something that you enjoy. It could be taking a walk, it could be running, it could be lifting weights, it could be whatever you enjoy, but that physical activity is really powerful. And then the third thing I would mention has to do with your friendships and your connections with other people. In the same way that physical activity is powerful lifting our mood, human connection is so extraordinarily powerful in making us feel better. And it's not always about how much time we spend, because this is where a lot of times we get hung up, right? Like I sometimes will think, hey, I've got this friend I really want to talk to, but let me wait till I have like an hour to catch up with them, because I only have 10 minutes right now. But it turns out even when we pick up the phone and talk to somebody for 2 minutes, even when we say, or I was just thinking about you, I only have 2 minutes, I'm about to head into work, but I just wanted to see how you were and just hear your voice. That 2 minutes will make us feel good for hours. And so building regular human interaction into our life, you would start with 5 minutes a day that you spend with somebody that you love on the phone, even emailing them, talking to them in person. Those 5 minutes can make a huge difference in how you feel. So these are a few things we can build into our life that can help us address some of the chronic stress and burnout we feel.
I love that you mentioned that, because I think a common thing a lot of people have experienced throughout this pandemic is this level of isolation. Some friendships naturally kind of, grow through seasons of life, and a lot of people have lost connections with people that they were close with before the pandemic. And so, and with working lives too, I think the pandemic has kind of accelerated the evolution of work, and with hybrid work, it brings awesome benefits for many people with flexibility and autonomy working remote, but you've removed so much of that social element. And I know you've done a ton of work on this specialization of loneliness. And I think sometimes people don't necessarily draw the line between what they're experiencing and feeling and that loneliness, that lack of social connection. So I guess my question for you here would be, what is loneliness? Like what does that look like?
That's such a good question, because loneliness is something a lot of us experience, but we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Loneliness is a subjective feeling that the human connections we need in our life are greater than the connections we actually have. And that might be different for each person, right? Somebody may have hundreds of people around them. Think about a young person on a college campus, for example. They may be seeing them, interacting with them in the dining hall, in the classroom, but they may not feel like they can truly be themselves around those people. They may not feel like those folks understand them, or that they can be vulnerable. And that can lead to a feeling of real loneliness. By contrast, you can also just have a couple people around you, but if you feel really connected to them, if you have a high quality relationship with them, you may not feel lonely at all. And so that's important to understand, but loneliness also looks very different in different people. For some people, may react to loneliness by withdrawing and being quiet. Others may actually react with anger and irritability. That's something many people say they see in their older parents after they retire, when they no longer have a community, they no longer have a source of meaning at work, and they feel very alone. Sometimes it can manifest as irritability and anger. But loneliness can also look like aloofness. And this is important because sometimes you might see somebody at a party and they might seem aloof to you, or they're not making eye contact. You might think, that person's like antisocial, or they don't really want to hang out. The truth is, a person actually might be really struggling with loneliness, but what can happen when you're chronically lonely is it can increase your level of vigilance. Let me just say what we think of as hypervigilance. And in that state, your threat perception shifts, right? So you start to perceive things as threats that may not be threats. And it's not your fault that you're doing that. It's actually evolutionary, because thousands of years ago when we were alone on the tundra, when we lost our hunter-gatherer groups, that was a time we were in great danger. And so even if there's a small chance that that twig breaking behind us was a predator, we wanted to perceive it as such because our life might depend on it. So your threat perception shifts when you're chronically lonely, and that can actually lead you to interact with other people in ways that can make them think that you're pushing them away. So it's just important to know loneliness looks different. So we can't always assume that because somebody isn't reaching out to us, or because they're not like jumping for engagement, that somehow that they're connected. It's why I think it's so important this day and age in particular to check on one another, to call your friends, ask them how they're doing. Don't assume that people are good just because their social media posts are bubbly and because they're not reaching out for help.
What advice would you give to someone who is lonely and is, craving that social interaction, but they spend, 8 hours a day working alone at home?
I think there is trade-offs with working from home, and I think the convenience and flexibility for family is absolutely important. The reduction in commute time, critical.
Yeah.
But we have to balance that. And if you have a life where you're predominantly working from home, you have to be a little more intentional about how you build in that time for human connection. That can come in one of several ways. One, it can look like making some time periodically to be in person at work. Maybe that's once a week, maybe it's once a month. But having some in-person interaction time with your work colleagues can be immensely helpful. The second thing is even if you have to be virtual, setting some time to interact virtually just purely for social reasons or just to talk to your colleagues at work is also important. You could have virtual coffees together, virtual lunches together. But that time where you're not focused on work, you're just talking as human beings, can also be immensely helpful. And the third thing I'd mention is about how you connect with your family and your friends and your neighbors outside of work, because that becomes all the more important when you don't have interactions at work. And again, this doesn't have to take a lot of time, but a couple of things we can do is one, just make sure that in your day, busy as it might be, that you just take 5 minutes to reach out to and connect with somebody that you care about. It could be on the phone, could be over text, it could be an email, could be in person. Second, make sure that 5 minutes, that you're giving them your full attention. So often when we're talking to other people, our phones slip out of our pockets and we're checking our inbox and we're distracted. And we might think we can multitask, but science tells us very clearly that we do not multitask well. Our brains rapidly task switch instead, which means that when I'm looking at my phone, I'm actually not fully perceiving what you're saying. So give somebody else a full benefit of your attention, and your attention has the ability to stretch time. So when you are fully present with somebody for just 5 minutes, sometimes that can feel like half an hour. Versus sometimes you can be on the phone with somebody for half an hour, but when you're so distracted, you're like, well, what did we actually talk about? Did we cover everything we were supposed to cover? You don't necessarily get there. So those two simple things, 5 minutes with your full attention, those can make a huge difference in helping you feel more connected at a time where many of us need more human connection in our lives.
Absolutely.
This is a time where so much is changing in people's lives, right? There's all the throes of the pandemic people have gone through, shifts in the workplace, but there are also changes happening in other people's lives, right? Many people have lost loved ones to the pandemic. They've had to struggle with homeschooling their kids early on. And even beyond that, there are just these big changes in technology that are shifting how we interact with each other, how we do our work, and big events happening in the world, from climate change driven events to wars, in different parts of the world. And all of this comes to us constantly, right? Through news feeds, through social media feeds. And so people are feeling constantly bombarded with information, often negative information that they don't know how to actually deal with and can't control. That can be very, very stressful. And so, for people out there who are feeling overwhelmed, anxious, and at times even hopeless about their lives or about the future, I just think it's important for us to recognize that this is not entirely our fault, right? This is a product of an extraordinarily rapidly changing environment that we are living in, with all kinds of things being thrown at us that we've never had to manage, going back hundreds of years. So one, we should just recognize that it's not our fault, and we are actually all in this together, even though it might seem like other people have their lives all together. I can tell you they don't. People are struggling with how to manage all of this on their own. So I think it's just important for us to recognize that, and this is a step-by-step process of trying to build in things that will help ground us, whether it's human connection, whether it's physical activity, where it's opportunities to just have time to take care of ourselves. That time in solitude can be very important. But it's also a time for us to ask, what is not serving us, right? And to try to minimize those things in our life. If we find that, for example, technology is distracting us from being with our family during dinner time, then that might be a chance to say, maybe I'm going to make dinner time a sacred space where we don't have technology and we just focus on each other. Maybe I'm going to make my conversations with friends a sacred space also, where we put away our phones and we focus on one another. Maybe I'm going to draw a more clear boundary with work so that I have a few minutes each day to take a walk, outside, because that time in nature is really restorative for me. Or maybe I'm going to take 15 minutes before I go to bed and protect that so I can read, because I know whenever I read, that really restores me and gives me joy. Whatever it is, this is our time to build in the things that help us and support us, but to also ask what does not serve us and to try to minimize that. And that is not selfish. That is what we should be doing to protect and preserve our well-being. And when we do that for ourselves, it turns out we positively impact the well-being of people around us, our family, our friends, our neighbors, and others.
Yeah, it's really important what you said to, realize everything that's gone on and everything we've got through, and just give ourselves that great grace to be like, I'm doing a good job. I'm proud of how I've navigated all this change and how I'm showing up in the world and setting boundaries. One of my favorite things, if you follow me on social media, if you could say 2 boundaries that would be really important to set between work and personal life to help your mental health, what would those 2 boundaries be?
Well, I think it's important we set boundaries that protect our time with people in our life, so we can be there for our family and for our friends. And if that means that you need to set a boundary so you can be home in time for dinner with your kids and your partner, that's an important boundary to set. And the second boundary has to do with our physical health. Many people just don't have time to go and exercise, or don't have time to go get food that might be healthier for them, and so they're having to pick up something that's not so healthy, but it's quick, because they don't have time off from work. All of that takes a toll on us over time. So whatever it is that you choose to do for your physical health, whether it's eating well, taking time to exercise, I think drawing a boundary with work that gives you some time to do that, even if it's an extra 10 or 15 minutes, that is so important. The combination of focusing on our mental health and our physical health, that's what is going to allow us to not only be healthy for the long term, but be fulfilled and happy. And drawing boundaries at work that allow us to invest in those spaces is well worth it.
Thank you. That was awesome. Thank you for this fantastic discussion. This has been very insightful. I'm learning so much, and I hope the audience does too. Before we finish, I have some very serious questions to ask you. Would you rather have a full day of just emails or a full day of meetings?
A full day of meetings, because I love seeing people in person.
Okay, good answer. What is your go-to email sign-off?
Well, when I'm feeling really connected to somebody and I'm writing an email, I will sign it with love and blessings. That's what I say.
Awesome. And how many times in 2020 did you forget to unmute your mic while speaking in a meeting?
Too numerous to count.
Like we all did, yes. Is there a medically professional word for moist?
Hydrated. Yeah, so something that has a good amount of water content would be considered moist. I think about moist cake, moist cookies. Like nobody wants dry cake, dry cookies.
Yep.
So I think moist can have a positive connotation in that context.
I'm personally a huge fan of the word, so. Do you wave goodbye at the end of virtual meetings?
I do.
I love that.
I do. I say goodbye and just wave. Too.
That's fantastic.
Thank you so much for watching, and thank you again to Dr. Murthy for taking the time to have this discussion with me. I hope you learned something. I know I sure did. And if you like this form of content, let me know in the comments. If there's something specifically that you're looking to learn more about, let me know and I'll see if I can make it happen. Well, I hope you have a great day. Toodaloo for now, work besties.
Toodaloo.
Toodaloo.